Dr. Pletter is a child psychologist in his 18th year of private practice in his Bethesda, Maryland office. He also founded iParent 101 and travels the country speaking to communities about digital parenting and the implication of the digital world on mental health and families. He has been featured in many media outlets, including The Washington Post, NPR, and Good Morning America. We are very excited to have him here with us in Nanuet this evening. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Adam Pletter.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me up from Washington. I actually grew up in New York, so it's not so foreign for me coming up here. I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping, quick couple of housekeeping things. We are recording this for parents who could not come tonight. I'm happy to see such a large crowd. Thank you all for coming out. So I'm going to try not to move around too much so I stay on camera, but I apologize for the people who I may be blocking, and if you can't see, just go like that and I'll move. I have a information-packed presentation for you tonight. I'm going to keep it as lively and energetic as I can. I've been traveling all day, but I'm going to get my energy going. The program itself is incredibly anxiety-provoking for most parents. You guys will let me know at the end. And it's not really aimed at families. This presentation, I'm going to modify it as I go, is really a parent course. And as I look out, I understand childcare sometimes is not simple. So I'm going to modify as I go just to make sure that I'm not exposing, ironically exposing your kids to things that are not meant to be exposed to children. So with that being said, again, this is a parenting course first and foremost. I'm going to go through a lot of information here. As questions come up, I'm not going to get stuck on any one question, but I want to answer questions as we go and have a discussion to the extent that we can with a large group. Because one thing you may know is when you're anxious about something, it's very difficult to focus on what's in front of you. That's how our brains are designed. When you're anxious, when your emotions go up, it's hard to think. You've all had this experience before. So as I'm rolling through all of this information, if there's something that's sort of stuck in your head, I'd rather you ask, and we could have a brief conversation about that, and then we'll move on. We hopefully will have time at the end for Q&A, but I'm fully aware that this is a long presentation for a school night, and we're starting, a little before, after 6:30. It's a 2-hour presentation is what I designed. So again, it's going to be a late night, and I want to be respectful to all of you. So there will be time for Q&A at the end, but if we have questions as we go, I think that's just simpler and streamlined. I work with lots of attorneys. So this, I don't know if you could see it, but that's my little disclaimer. Nothing you're about to hear me say or that we're going to talk about tonight replaces any direct consultation or treatment. If you have questions around that, obviously you want to consult with your local medical providers, or you could ask me at the end and I'll do my best to point you in the right direction, but I'm not as familiar with Rockland County anymore, so you'll have to let me know. Okay, so we're going to jump in. Keep your phones out, but you might want to keep them silenced so I don't get distracted. The basic course outline tonight, we're going to talk a lot about, as I look around, let me ask this. If you're a parent of, you could raise your hand more than once. If you're a parent of a 5 and below, raise your hand, please. Okay, 5 to 7. Okay, 7 to 10. Okay, a lot of you. 10 to 13. Okay, 13 to 15 or 14 to 15. Okay, 15 up. 20 up. Okay, I see you out there. That's good. Okay, I just want to get a sense of who's here. It's a large group, so want to make sure that I'm going to address what you all, I think, are going to be thinking of. So as I watched those hands go up, it was kind of 50-50, and I'm not going to sort of age too many of you, but from my point of view, the majority of us in this room did not grow up with any digital world at all. Okay, and so I begin with this idea that we are digital immigrants. First and foremost, the parents, generation, who parenting is parenting, right? That's not a new concept. So parenting, our obligation as parents is to safeguard, first and foremost, right? Safety is number one. And then our job is to mentor and to teach our children to be able to regulate themselves, to teach them to be able to go out and manage themselves in this world. So as I'm going through a lot of this material tonight, I want to be very, very clear that as I'm talking about setting limits and restrictions and certain regulations in place for your children, it's not about keeping them in a bubble or a cocoon. It's about giving them, in a stepwise program, what they could handle and not too much more. They're still going to get ahead of us. But the idea is that they have to be able to take care of themselves in the next 5, 10 years, depending on the age of your kid, right? So it's not about just keeping it away. I want to be very clear about that at the beginning. I'm going to talk a lot about this digital culture as I see it. I'm going to talk about assimilating as best we can as old people, the olds. Sorry, we are. I'll be 45 this month, halfway to 90. We're old. We did not, sorry, perspective, halfway to 90. We did not grow up with this. This is a brand new, even though it's been about 20 years, it's a brand new setup for all of us as parents. And our kids are digital natives, and they don't know anything different. They've grown up. You have some young kids. You've seen them flipping around on iPads, even while they're in diapers. It's not shocking, right? So we're going to talk about assimilating into this culture. And from my point of view, controversial as it is, this little pocket-sized computer that I carry around that we call phones is actually my external hard drive. And we are the first generation of cyborgs, from my point of view. External hard drive. When I was a kid, I could name 20 phone numbers off the top of my head. I might know 1 or 2 at this point. I don't need to remember anything. GPS, all of this is amazing. And I just want to be clear that as I talk about all the scary stuff in a few minutes and some of the concerns, that the positives don't get lost. Because I don't think any of us would give up the digital world and say, yeah, it's not for me, I'm just going to go live on a mountain somewhere. If you would, you could do that. I don't see that happening. Okay, and you could tell me if I'm wrong. So it's really about adjusting and assimilating to this new culture. And then with whatever time we have left, I'm going to show you my iParent 101 program, which is basically a behavior modification program laying out levels of access. My premise here is that our children, instead of them having everything all at once, where they have to learn to process it and get overwhelmed by it often, that I'm going to be setting up a program for you all where you're going to be offering them different levels of access depending on their age and depending on what they can demonstrate. And their behavior, their choices. There's trade-offs at every turn. There's compromises at every turn. And so we want to set it up in a way where they're changing their behavior, they're handling themselves in appropriate ways, safe ways, increasingly regulated ways, and then they get more access. Instead of, here's everything, you've heard some of the scary stories, depending on how old you are, Johnny, don't get in trouble. Johnny's going to get in trouble because the internet is a dysregulating, by design, we'll get into this in a minute, but by design, the internet, all of the gaming, all of the social media is brilliantly designed to pull us in, to pull our attention and keep us hooked. And I'm not being cynical by saying that. That is absolutely true. It's an attention economy, and the advertising dollars and other sources of income, marketing income, is fueling a lot of the digital world, and the amount of information coming at us as adults is overwhelming, and especially for our developing children. The future adults that we are raising, future adults, are more susceptible to this amount of information. As animals, our brains were not designed to process the amount of information that we are processing on a daily basis, minute by minute basis, depending on what you're doing. And so this is where I begin, okay? Everybody's awake? Did I scare you all already? Come on, we're okay. All right, so let's jump in. As I talked about us being digital immigrants, I go back to where this began. And this was part of a Super Bowl commercial a couple years ago. Hope the volume will work. But this sort of sets the stage for me of where the digital world was introduced to many of you. Some of you may have seen this live while you were getting ready for college or ready for work, okay?
After 56 pass, I wasn't prepared to translate that.
Everybody see it?
With the A and then the ring around it. See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah.
But I've never heard it said. I've always seen it marked. There it is. Feedback. Calm. I mean, what is internet anyway? What do you write to it like mail?
There's Allison. Can you explain what internet is?
Now here's a little background. When we installed internet access on our computer, I got the whole family involved.
It's true. Everybody had their own tasks to do.
It was a lot of work, but it was really worth it.
Now that I've gotten on the internet, I'd rather be on my computer than doing just about anything. It's really cool. The internet gave us a whole world of exciting new possibilities. So I guess this is the story of how it changed our lives. Maybe it will yours too.
I'd like to add a word about safety, though. You have to remember the internet is not a regulated environment, so the quality and accuracy of various informational offerings can differ quite a bit. There may even be a concern if your children should access some of them.
Right, so that first clip, you hopefully all recognize, that was the Today Show from 1994. Brian Gumbel, Katie Couric, that wasn't some obscure thing like that second clip that I found. That was on the Today Show. They had no idea what the internet was. They weren't trying to be funny and cute there. Sometimes they did that back then. That wasn't cute. They literally had no idea. Can you explain what the internet was? The @ sign, all of that was brand new. And so again, that's where I begin. That second clip, I believe, I found that on YouTube. I believe that came as a CD-ROM for all the other olds in the room. It was a CD-ROM that came with, I think, Windows 95, maybe 98. I couldn't figure it out, but really, you know, the beginning of those the internet computers. And very nice family. It took a lot of work to set it up. There might be informational offerings. I'm not sure where they got that phrase, but informational offerings that might not be appropriate for your kids. It's an unregulated environment. All of that is exactly the same in 2019. It has not changed. It still takes a lot of work to set it up. The difference is something changed in probably the last 15 to 10 years especially, where parents sort of know that. And again, I'm a parent too, got an almost 15 and 11-year-old at home. I struggle with this every single day. You could ask my kids, they hate it. The fact that I'm even doing this right now, they hate it. But it's almost impossible to take care of all this because it takes so much work. But parenting is parenting. And so, like that Shelley Long-looking character at the end, Mom, she said it's an unregulated environment. It still is. And so what I'm going to try to go through tonight is giving you all some idea of, as digital immigrants, as we are, that we could help safeguard and teach our kids to manage in this ridiculously unregulating environment, dysregulating environment. So we are digital parenting pioneers. No other generation ever has straddled the non-digital world and the digital world. And as far as I can tell, without a crystal ball, I don't think there'll be another generation in the future either. There might be some other new age that I can't even imagine right now, but we are it. We are the pioneers. And I don't say that lightly. Our children, as I mentioned, are digital natives, right? So just really quickly, and they're the first generation. If you think about the sort of immigrant analogy for what that's worth here, they are first generation. They are first generation digital citizens. Really fast, because I don't want to get stuck on this. Any certain social media apps, anything that your kids are doing that you want me to make sure I have in my brain as we go through this tonight? Yeah, please. YouTube, yep, we'll hit it.
I would say specifically Minecraft, all the games out there, and the things that are embedded in those games.
Yep.
That the kids learn, aside from just watching these characters going on, they're doing and saying different things. I mean, I'm saying it's more YouTube where they're watching.
Yep, watching their game, yep.
Play, and these people can say whatever they want.
Yep. Well, yes, I'll definitely hit on some gaming.
Like
yep.
Roblox.
Roblox,
That's
okay.
a big one.
Any Fortnite parents?
Nope.
Yeah, couple, okay. Apex Legends? Is that, yeah, okay, good, okay. Any other quick? No, okay. All right, so we're gonna start off with a game. Keep your own score. You guys are awake, right? Okay. All right, we're going to jump in. As you already heard, I am not a tech expert. I am a child psychologist. Those two things often don't go together, so I know I'm kind of a freak. But these are the terms that I'm focused on as I go through this presentation tonight. It's not about the tech to me. I'm here as a parenting expert trying to help parents manage this overwhelming world. These are the terms that I'm, or at least a sample of the terms that I get focused on as I work with these kids all day long in my practice and as I attempt to parent in my own world. So just really fast, depression, anxiety, all are on the uptick. We haven't proved, there's no proof of causation quite yet, but there's clearly correlation, meaning a relationship. Increased screen time, increased depression, anxiety, and suicide rates are going through the roof. Sad and tragic as that is, every single one, but they're going through the roof. Again, not causation, but correlation. There is a relationship and a strong one. Sleep deprivation, empathy building, a lot of texting, you don't see the facial expressions. There's also this research that came out a couple years ago that said when you're doing something with your fingers, like playing a video game or on your phone, the part of your brain that develops empathy literally shuts off. So we have this generation of kids growing up constantly doing things with their fingers. There's no more boredom. We all have to be doing something. And that part of the brain that's developing empathy, thinking about other people's feelings, other people's reactions, is just shut off. And I don't know for sure, but in my head, I think that's connected to how, back in caveman time, if you're banging rocks together or breaking branches to build a shelter, it probably slowed you down to think about other people's feelings, so that part of your brain shut off. And our brains now, in 2019, are not that different than the earlier humans from even hundreds of thousands of years ago. Evolution takes that long in terms of brain structure. So we have, this world where we have this tremendous amount of information now, and our brains are not equipped to manage it. And if our brains aren't equipped, our children's brains are definitely not equipped. The emotional part of the brain is overactive when you're a child and or adolescent, teenager, and that's by design also, because that's how they don't live with you when they're 40, hopefully, because they're so emotional that they're going out seeking out information, learning about the world, learning how to take care of themselves. So that emotional part of the brain is overactive. And the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain, the regulatory system of the brain, is underactive. It's underdeveloped, in fact, until the age of 25 or so. That's why rental cars don't rent to people under 25, because statistically, there's higher chance of poor judgment and more accidents, more money, right? So we have this system, we have this setup where our kids don't have a fully developed regulatory system, the braking system of the brain, regulating. Then we have an overactive emotional brain, and then we have an unending, amazing supply of information at their fingertips. And so that's what our kids are dealing with, and that's why I'm so concerned about these terms. Feeling disconnected, shifting attention back and forth. There is no such thing as multitasking. We'll talk more about that. It's shifting your attention very quickly. And our kids shift way faster than at least I can, because they've grown up shifting. Practicing helps from early ages. Safety concerns, cyberbullying we'll definitely touch on. Anybody see that FOMO? You guys know what FOMO is? Fear of missing out. So this didn't begin with the internet. Fear of missing out has been around, I'm assuming since the beginning of time. Other people are doing something, I'm not part of it, I wonder what I'm missing. It's that anxiety or that pressure that we all have felt. You don't have to admit to it. I have felt. I'll speak for you. We all have felt at some point where I wonder what's going on. I wonder what I'm not part of. I'm not included. I was excluded, or I was invited, but I'm at grandma's for dinner and I can't go. It's a huge piece of the digital world now, especially for our kids, because it's not really the FOMO that I'm concerned about. It's not the fo. It's the mo. It's the missing out. It's the chronic missing out that I get focused on, because if you're in middle school, or in a middle school, right, or high school, you easily could have 1,000 followers depending on the platform. I don't know about up here how large these schools are, but at least down in Maryland, my daughter goes to a high school where she easily could have 1,000 followers depending on how active she is, or he is, depending on who we're talking about. And so you can't be at the mall with your friends walking around and at this sleepover and at this birthday party. You literally can't be at all those places at once. Virtually you can. On Snapchat and on Instagram, you could jump around very quickly. But in real life, you are going to be missing out. Add to it some live streaming, and you could actually watch live what you're missing out on and be part of it in some way, which adds to some cyberbullying often because they're not really part of it. And so there's a lot of layers here, okay? But it's the Mo that I get focused on, not so much the FOMO. And we could talk about JOMO later if you want. Someone usually raises their hand and asks me about JOMO, which is the joy of missing out. Like, it's a good thing to miss out on things. I don't really buy it, but I get the idea of it, and I do recommend to kids, and I go around to some middle schools especially, I'll be at one next week, where I do talk to kids, not so much about JOMO, but about letting things build up. The excitement of going to the phone when you haven't looked at it for a while and seeing what you missed. Is that JOMO? I don't know, that term seems kind of silly to me, but letting it build up so you're not so engaged constantly. Letting it build up is very important. Okay, and so so the adult devices unsupervised is what we're talking about. These are adult devices out of the box. Don't forget that. They have to be set up for kids. All right, so we're going to play the game. Everybody ready? Name that app. Okay. All right, so we got YouTube. Someone mentioned that. So just a couple of quick stats. 300 hours of video uploaded per minute. Again, I'm old, but I can't wrap my head around that. That's a whole lot of video per minute. 1.3 million video views per minute. Let that sink in for a second. There's amazing content on YouTube. I learned how to put this together on YouTube. Anytime I want to watch a movie or a reference something or a song I don't have quick access to, it's all there on YouTube. And if you've been paying attention to the news lately, there's a lot of also inappropriate content on YouTube. A lot of Momo and all kind of crazy stuff, scary, inappropriate content that also comes through on YouTube. Inappropriate. There's also endless content. No one ever has said, I finished that and I feel satisfied when you're on YouTube or anything on the internet. Oh, I got to the end of that. I think that was a commercial also. You know, oh, I finished the internet. No, you didn't. There's no satisfaction. It's a constant, there's more to go. Oh, if I click on this, oh, if I like this, I'll click over here. And our kids, again, without a fully developed regulatory system, are more vulnerable to that. Who wants to do homework when I have YouTube in front of me? Who wants to do classwork? I don't know the school policy here, but who wants to do classwork when I have YouTube in the class? And it's a major issue that is both at home in families and in school districts around the country. It's not just on the East Coast. No need for delay. For years, we've been concerned with kids and teenagers about who their influencers are, who's a bad influence, who's a good influence on our kids. Now we have all these, hundreds and thousands of what they call vloggers, social media influencers. And they have millions of followers. This is Logan Paul. I looked up his net worth a couple of months ago when I put one of these slides together. I think he was like $18 million. Like, he's a clown. He was the one who got in trouble last year for making fun of the suicide in Japan. He was all over the news. Again, he's a clown. But he's a very successful, funny, a lot of physical humor, and the kids love it. It's just dumb, bozo, sorry if you're watching this, clown. And yet, this is his career, and he's a multimillionaire. So be aware of that, and the kids get pulled in. YouTube also, as you mentioned, is great for watching the video games that you like. That is a hobby, a pastime of most kids at this point. Not every kid, but even the kids who are into sports and whatever else, you sit them in front of YouTube, they're going to go and watch Fortnite being played or whatever the game is that they're trying to master, and that's not new either. I remember when I was a kid and I used to play Super Mario Brothers, I would get the Nintendo magazine and try to figure out how to hack it and whatever the thing, like, how do I get ahead? That's part of human nature. So it didn't begin with YouTube. Okay? Moving on. YouTube Kids, very good. Again, in the news recently because of Momo, right? So YouTube Kids was Google, who owns YouTube. Their answer a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago at this point, when I first started doing this, they decided they needed a sanitized version because they were getting a lot of flack from parents and from advertisers that YouTube was inappropriate for kids and there was scary stuff. So they made YouTube Kids, and it's done by an algorithm. It's a robot, it's a computer that screens the videos. And so if you have a really young kid, maybe preschool age, and you're monitoring it, it's better than YouTube. But there's tons of things that get by, lots of inappropriate content, deceptive advertising, lots of junk food, McDonald's, just bad stuff that you don't necessarily want your little kid getting hooked. Oh, let's go to get McDonald's or whatever it is. And then with Momo in the last couple of weeks, Momo, if you're not familiar, was this viral, as far as I can tell, hoax where these happen every couple of years where this thing got spread around by really well-intentioned parents and professionals like myself, warning parents that this Momo character, which is a really hideous horror movie-looking sculpture from Japan, that basically would be a jump scare in the middle of some YouTube videos, kid-related videos especially. And then Momo would then, there were these contacts that they would contact the kid on social media. It would be Momo talking to your kid, and it would pop up randomly, it seems, and then challenge your kid to do certain silly things, and then eventually the challenges got more and more scary, ending with supposedly telling your kid how to commit suicide. That was the end of the Momo challenge. As far as I can tell, and I talk about this in detail, I did a whole podcast on this last week or 2 weeks ago when it first came out. You could Google that, it's on Google. If you just looked up Momo and my name, it would come up, where I talk in more detail about this. But as far as I can tell, it is a hoax. There's been no tragedies associated with Momo, but it got spread around like wildfire because of parents like us who want to keep everyone safe. And this is a freaky, scary thing that we want to make sure that that people are safe. And so just be aware, there's always these kind of challenges. Please.
Just really quickly about that.
Mm-hmm.
When it came out, when I saw it, I'm not for it. It scared the heck out of me.
Yeah, it's a really freaky, scary picture.
In Japan.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of doubt how it works. I read all about it.
Yeah.
In those next few days. I didn't even want to watch the video because I really
Yep.
upset me. But I can imagine. But then I talked to my wife about it, saying it was supposedly a hoax, like you're saying. She said she actually saw the video where it was embedded in the middle.
Right, that's not a hoax.
That's not a hoax.
The
I know the end game thing might have been a hoax.
Right.
but-
So just again, we could spend an hour on Momo. So I would encourage, if people want more information on Momo, to check out that podcast. But it's not a hoax that this freaky-looking character, and I'm sure if you haven't seen it already, you will. That is scary enough, and that is embedded in children's videos. Which is why and I'll have an answer to this in a second. So you want to be aware of what your especially young kids are watching, because I'm hearing from my children's friends, some of my own kids in my office, the image of Momo, and it's this dark-eyed little girl, bird-like character that it looks like from a horror movie. Whether it's Annabelle or whatever, there's always these freaky, Freddy Krueger, if you're, grew up in the 80s, this sort of freaky image. And if you're vulnerable and you tend to be a little bit more anxious and a little bit more visually obsessive, which a lot of kids are, especially young kids, it gets stuck in their head. And especially when things are quiet, like bedtime, it's really hard to get it out of their head. And that's what I'm seeing in my office a lot. So it's a real thing. The hoax part that I was referring to, as far as I'm aware, is I don't think it's really been associated with any suicides, but we don't want any. So it gets us caring parents freaked out about that, and that's why it's spread so much. Are there kids in the room, or did they leave?
I think all the children have left.
They have left? Okay. Anyone offended by inappropriate language? All right, I'll just be very brief, but this is on YouTube Kids last I checked, and I find this hysterically funny. Just tell you something about me.
Where the fuck did you get off helping people? What people would you think? I wasn't going to find out.
All right, so that's Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro from Casino, the movie. Again, I find that very funny every time I see it. I wouldn't find it funny if I was the parent of a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, and I was giving them YouTube Kids in their stroller, and you put in Sesame Street, it goes from one to the next. So hopefully it's not still out there, but last I checked earlier this year, it was still on YouTube Kids. So be aware. So my recommendation is to find other apps that are not YouTube Kids, not YouTube, that are screened by people. Oops, screened by humans, right? So we have Jester, we have Jellies, there's others out there. Jester's the one that I've used the most. And the reason I like Jester so much, and I think Jellies is similar, Jellies is a little bit more educational, where Jester has all kind of educational and Minecraft and other kind of videos. And it's screened by a person, an actual person before it even goes on the app. And it has this parent thing, I don't know if you could see it there, where you can log in as the parent and make a playlist for your kid. So not only is it already screened to get on the app, but then you're also, as the parent, screening it if you're going on a road trip, or you just know for the week that's coming up, you know, you're going to be working late or working from home, and you're going to want your kid to watch YouTube or whatever. You could actually load up a playlist, and you know exactly what your kid is watching. You don't have to worry about the Momo. It's not going to be there, or other freaky things that are on the internet. Remember, informational offerings, it's an unregulated environment, still is. Okay, so those are just two alternatives. Instagram, we're still playing Name That App. Very good. Instagram, I'm going to try to go through this quickly. Instagram originally it still is the most popular, one of the most popular photo sharing apps. Most of you are probably relatively familiar with Instagram, so I don't want to get stuck in the weeds on it too much. But it's sharing photos with comments. And there's a whole like system, which becomes a social currency of who's getting the most likes. But it's photo sharing with the filters. Instagram, when it first came out, you would take a picture with your phone, and it would, you could then set a certain filter, and it would make it look like a Polaroid camera, or you know, it could make it look vintage or old or whatever it was. And that's sort of where it, you know, it set itself apart from some of the Viscos and some of the other photo sharing apps at that time. Now most of these apps sort of have morphed, and they're all very similar from Snapchat. They all have these stories, and it's mostly I take a picture. Depending on who I want to share it with, it goes out to my followers, to my friends, whatever, and it's all basically, you have a filter, and you have comments and the like system. In middle school, be aware of Finstagram, which is fake Instagram. It's the exact same app. There's no difference, but the child just makes another account. Different username, use like a pun or something funny about their name, and it's a smaller group of followers. So chances are mom and dad don't know about it, and if they did, because you could ask your kids about it, hopefully they'll be honest, but you're not going to be following the Finsta account, chances are. Why would they want a smaller group of followers? For those of you in middle school, they're sharing more inappropriate things, right? Potty humor, some sexual stuff, potentially nude kind of sexting kind of photos, generally, or they just don't want their Aunt Selma and mom and dad seeing what they're posting. Could be as innocent and simple as that, but still raises that concern. If that wasn't bad enough, there's also Sinstagram, emphasis on the sin, which is an even smaller group, which is just another account. It's all under the same app. They just create another account. Smaller group, could be 5 to 10 of their friends. And why would they want a whole different account with such a small grouping? Again, to share even more inappropriate pictures with that small group. Okay?
Are these actually different apps, or you're just saying
No.
Within Instagram they create different accounts? Okay.
Yes, within Instagram, you just go into the settings and you can just make a new account.
Okay.
So once you allow your child, which you have to be 13 technically, there is a marketing law, it was in the news last week, it's called COPPA, where all of these social media companies are not allowed to collect data about anyone who's under the age of 13. And they all do, and at least some of them are starting to get in trouble now. TikTok just got fined like $5 million 2 weeks ago. Please.
Just a question, has there been like a demonstrable That's what I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Most teenagers I know, yeah, most teenagers I know have a Facebook an account. They don't post that much on it though. It's there. They're not really hanging. At least what I'm told is what you just said, that their parents are on Facebook, so why would they want to be there? Which I understand. Most parents are on Instagram now too, or at least most parents in my age group and younger definitely are on Instagram and maybe even Snapchat. But we'll talk about that. We good? Okay. So we talked about FOMO. My emphasis is on the Mo. This is all over social media, constantly being aware of what you're missing out on. Not just the fear of the missing out, but the chronic, real missing out. I can't be in more than one place at one time physically. Virtually I can, physically I cannot, so I'm gonna miss out. That's part of this new world, new culture. The like system, as we talked about, with the self-worth, lots of bikini shots, lots of food, I'm on vacation, I get depressed every spring break or winter break because I don't typically go that many places, and all over the news feeds and all the kids that I work with, everyone's going somewhere, and if you don't go somewhere, again, is that FOMO, or it just feels kind of lousy because, you know, everything's curated. People are posting the most amazing pictures and the views and the desserts and so it just, and if, again, as an adult, I could sort of laugh at that and say, who cares? But if you're 10 and you're in this world potentially 24/7, it creates a much bigger upset, chronically. And that's the concern. It's chronic. It's not just for a few hours a day. This is something that is every single day. The developmental need for all of this, I hope I've been clear, is absolutely normal. There's nothing weird about our kids that they want to be part of these things, that they want to be connected, even with strangers, as we'll talk about in a minute. That is absolutely normal. They're connecting, they're reaching out, they're finding common interests. Developmentally, it absolutely makes sense. There's nothing pathological or weird about this. It's normal and predictable and expected. Geotagged photos, something also very important for all of these. As I mentioned, we call this a phone, right? This is a pocket-sized computer, and by default, every picture that is taken with that pocket-sized computer has a digital file embedded into it. Believe it or not, the pictures we take with our phones are not photographs. They're digital files. If you print it out, then you have a photograph. But otherwise, everything on that phone is a digital file. And by default, it has this satellite data embedded into every photo taken. And depending on the app, could actually link up who you took the photo with too. So it tells, in the file, it says where the picture was taken, what time it was taken, through the GPS, through the satellites, and potentially if you're tagging your friends within the app, who you were with. And so if you're four 12-year-old girls walking around the mall and you're Snapchatting, you're basically broadcasting to whatever creepy people that might be in that general area where you are, and again, it raises safety concerns. I will show you in a minute how to turn that off, which is not hard, but it's on by default. And again, I consult in with some tech companies. They don't really want to hear about this because I'm sure it hurts their bottom line. I'm guessing. I'm not privy to that, but there has to be some reason why that's on by default because it definitely is a safety concern. Okay? So, moving on. So cyberbullying is ripe in all of this kind of back and forth. You know, what kind of picture you post, and then you look fat and you look ugly, and or you know, I don't get as many likes as the person who I'm in the picture with. Again, you know, when you're an insecure teenager, which almost by definition, every teenager is insecure because they're trying to figure out how to manage themselves and who they are, and you know, many adults are insecure too, but certainly teenagerhood, adolescence is a time of being insecure. That's normal. Okay, so cyberbullying is ripe. Moving on, just really fast, just want to kind of cover a couple of these. Thank you. Snapchat. Snapchat's big thing when it came out, again, about 4 years ago, was unlike Instagram, even though it's still photo sharing and comments and the like system, Snapchat's thing that made it different when it first came out, at least, was that whatever picture you took disappeared within 60 seconds or 90 seconds in the app. And that is true, it does. Unfortunately, what gets set up is this sort of false sense of privacy, because if the picture disappears, I could take whatever picture I want, goofy, silly, inappropriate, sexual, nude, whatever, because it's going to disappear. In fact, it does disappear from the app, depending on how the app is set up from the user. But it doesn't disappear from the internet. It is saved on multiple servers. It's kind of weird to think about, but everything we send on our phones bounces around multiple satellites. It's depending on who your service provider is, whether it's Time Warner or Comcast or Sprint or AT&T, Verizon, they're saving copies of everything. Again, chances are if you're a kid, you're not thinking about this, and it would never be an issue, hopefully, right? But it is saved, it is not private. If that's not bad enough with Snapchat, often teenagers simply screenshot the picture before it disappears. You hold down both buttons. Not only do you have a perfect copy, but that copy, it belongs to you now. So Sally sends Jimmy a picture, let's say of a new hat that she got. We'll call it a hat, sure. And now Jimmy screenshots. Jimmy owns that picture now. It's not just a copy, it's his picture, it's in his photo album. The good news is that if Sally were to do that, Sally would get a notification back saying that Jimmy screenshotted the picture. And as I notice everyone's nodding, or many of you are nodding, and that makes us feel a little bit better, right? It gives us some relief. But it doesn't change anything. Sorry to rip that away from you, but Jimmy still owns that picture and probably already sent it to Johnny and 4 of his other friends. So yes, Sally knows it was screenshotted, and maybe she'll learn and not do that again, sending something inappropriate, but it's already too late. Most Jimmys that I know don't screenshot because they don't want Sally to know, so they take Johnny's phone, because they travel in packs often. I take a picture of my picture, I have a pretty good copy, and now Sally doesn't know it was screenshotted because it wasn't. Sorry, but this is what's out there. Streaks is the other important thing that I like to highlight with Snapchat. I'm trying to go quickly here. Streaks is not Will Ferrell running through the quad from old school. Streaks are a very important part of Snapchat, where you're taking a random picture. It could be the side of this podium, could be my shoelace, and Sally's sending it to Jimmy. Jimmy sends a similar picture of that leg of that chair back to Sally. How many days in a row have they gone back and forth is the streak. And the numbers get really important. The numbers grow very quickly over days, and it becomes obsessively important to many, many teenagers. So important that they're sharing passwords. I'm grounded, I can't get on Snapchat. Can you do my streaks? I'm going on vacation, there won't be any cell service. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Can you do my streaks? Here's my password. And today's best friend, as you know in middle school, is next week's enemy, and then the enemies are sharing because they have their password under the person's name. I hear the stories almost every day. Scary stuff. So.
What are they getting from that?
The streaks? It's a good question. What are they getting from the streaks was the question. It's a feeling of connectedness. It's a feeling of validation. It's the number. It's a gamified thing where I'm getting dopamine going off in my brain as the number goes up. It makes me feel good. My number's bigger than their number. That's my short answer.
What age group do you think the streaks are most prevalent?
I want to say 10 to 18. It may be younger, depending on the community, and it might be slightly older, but certainly middle school and up. If they have Snapchat, chances are they're doing streaks.
So it's just random pictures?
Often, yeah. Often it could be like their earlobe, or it's not necessarily a selfie or anything important. It's something random, is at least what I'm told.
You select somebody, because my daughter one day had something that looked like fireworks, it looked like one of those animated things. I said, what is that? She said, oh, so-and-so sent a streak. This girl she doesn't go to what now? She said she sent it to everybody.
Yeah, I think you can go through and select who. What I hear more than not is that they're sending a specific picture to a certain friend, and it's their streak going back and forth. In theory, you could send that same picture to multiple people. I think you go through and just, kind of hit each person. as you go through, or tap it. That's my understanding. Please, really fast.
You can take a picture of anything. Sometimes it's a selfie, but sometimes it's just a random like. It just has to be sent every day. You can't miss a day. Instead, you get.
Right.
And you have to go back and forth for people to send it. So we were in the middle school, and there were people who were at like 700 something. That's over 2 years. They've been sending it, so they get obsessive and competitive with how good their streak is, and they don't want to break it. So it's more of like a bragging and like, this is my good friend, I streak with this person, whatever it is. And that's why when they're going on vacation or anything, they'll send it to someone else because they have lose 2
Right.
years of streak.
Right, you can imagine, if, even as an adult, if you have been working on something that you feel is important, regardless of other people's judgment, and for some other thing that's not in your control, you're going to lose that thing, that's going to bother you. That's going to upset you. So thank you so much for that explanation. That was great. Real fast, please.
Sorry, really fast.
Yeah, that's good.
Because they're a generation that never grew up without it.
Mhm.
We had it, and we were able to develop our brains before that. Do they think it's ever going to get to the point where they know that doesn't matter? Like those numbers don't matter in life. But you have to be a certain age, like you said, with a certain
Yeah.
cortex. Like, but are these kids ever going to get to that point because they don't know anything else?
It's a great question. I don't think I'm equipped to answer
Yeah,
it.
I just don't know.
Really, I hope. You know, certainly with maturity, I've worked with enough guys and girls over the years, you know, where, you know, what was so important to them a couple of years ago, they could sort of laugh at now, and they did grow up with this. So I'm going to say, hopefully, and some of the time, but I don't know, because they're not going to have the same reference point we have. So it's not going to be the same as it really doesn't matter. Like, you know, when I was in the 1980s, none of this existed. It didn't matter, literally. You know, I don't think it's ever going to get to the point where it doesn't matter at all, but could they have the maturity and wherewithal to take a step back, zoom out, and kind of see how silly that was? But my guess is at that point there'll be something else that will replace it that in their 20s will be just as important. That, you know, if we had more time, we could probably come up with at least a few ideas. So, yep. Facebook really fast. The one thing I'm just going to say quickly about Facebook, ironically, because of all this huge scandal and it's all over the news now, the digital footprint as you're going to colleges, I didn't make up this term, but it's actually a digital tattoo because it's permanent. Everything on the internet is public, even if it feels private, and permanent. And as far as I'm aware, not just Facebook, but again, I think Facebook is what the admissions officers are most comfortable with. I've heard crazy stories of, 17-year-olds going for interviews and the interviewer asking them to pull up their Facebook right in the middle of the interview. Sounds crazy to me, but I've heard that more than once. And I've also heard many times applications being rescinded after something inappropriate being shared. Even if it's not their original content, you thought it was silly, funny, and they just send it off, your acceptance has been rescinded. And I've known guys who are on gap years because of that. After they got in first, early decision, and now they're, on a gap year because they are not going to college, at least as planned. So it's real life, real consequences, be aware. So I'm always encouraging guys, once they get into that 15, 16-year-old range, whether it's Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram, go through, clean up what you posted, what you thought was funny 2 years ago. Chances are you're not going to think it's funny in 2 more years. Get rid of it. Delete it. You could save it on your computer or on your phone. Don't have it out on the internet. Okay? So curating and cleaning up your digital tattoo. Please. So if it's public or if it's private, the admissions officers can't go in and see the private pictures. But if you're sitting in an interview, it doesn't matter if it's private or not, because if you say, no, I don't want to log in, that's not going to look good either. So, unless there's a reason to keep it on there, it's like cleaning out an old closet. Oh, I didn't even realize that was there. Well, that's often what you're going to find. So I'm encouraging kids to kind of just, there's no reason to have that out there as part of your identity, your public identity. Okay? And the last piece on kids with social media, I talk about the weird factor, whether it's Roblox, Fortnite, Apex Legends, anything on the internet, even YouTube with the comment section. Anything that makes them feel weird or they're not sure about it, don't just accept that. If it's weird, trust your instincts and talk to your mom or dad. Flag it. You can report it. You might just delete it and walk away, but I want them to have that on their radar, to be aware that there are creepy, weird people in this world. We see them every day. Sorry, you all seem lovely, but we see crazy, weird people every day, everywhere we go. At least I do. And I don't mean that as a joke. And just like they're in our, hopefully not our neighborhoods, but they're in our communities, these weird, creepy people, they're on the internet. And kids, as they, on these adult devices in this adult world, it is an adult digital world. That's who's running the internet, not little kids. They're adults. Even the Minecraft people, and often they're adults, and often their language matches being an adult. So just, I talk about the weird factor for them just to be aware and to not hold it in. That you don't pull it away if they come to you. Don't punish them for talking to you about something that was weird, but we want to have that dialogue. If it hasn't been clear, my huge push tonight, we're about almost an hour in, so I'll pull the curtain back. What I am strongly encouraging us all to do as parents is to get this parent-child dialogue going so you are mentoring, you are safeguarding, and they're learning from you. And it's the back and forth where you are the trusted adults that you're basically inviting them into this world. I don't care who paid for the phone, whether it was a gift from Aunt Selma or whatever. You're the parent, you're handing it to them, you're inviting them into the digital world with all the awesome stuff in the digital world and so not so awesome. It's out there. Yes? Thank you for summarizing why we're here tonight. Exactly. Well, thank you. So it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge, and it's a problem. And that's why I start with that we are digital immigrants. Even if you're in your 30s, you still didn't grow up with the internet that you might have had the internet more than I had in high school or even in college. But even if you're in your 30s, you don't have the reference point that your kids have. And so we are digital immigrants, and it's like any other immigrant from another culture now in charge of this new culture and teaching. That's a very difficult setup. I don't care what culture we're talking about. When you're assimilating into a new culture and you're in charge of teaching that culture, that's a major challenge. And that's what we're faced with. Okay? All right, we're going to move on. I'm going to skip that. All right, so we're going to go through a speed round now. I'm going to try to cover this quickly. What? Oh, yes, Kik. Very good. Usually people don't get that so quickly. So that's Kik. One of many anonymous texting apps. Okay, many. Okay? So we went from Instagram and Snapchat that typically is associated with a name, a phone number, some identifying information typically, not 100% of the time, but typically, to all of these and more, this is what I could fit on a slide, anonymous texting apps that use the GPS. You're talking to people often in your geographic area. There's an age limit supposedly of 17. It's not enforced. No one cares about it but me. All the concerns that we just talked about with these other social media apps are still there. Developmental need is totally normal. This Whisper app, for example, they're sharing secrets. And I often get this sort of look from parents. I could name a few of you right now. Like, why would you share secrets with a stranger? And it makes sense to me. You're finding someone that has your interest. It's a sympathetic ear. It's someone I can connect with. They get me. It feels private, and I'm out there. I'm sharing. To me, it's sad, but it's very, very common. So there's all these apps and more. Anonymous. You don't know who you're texting. You don't know who you're messaging with, sharing pictures with. And obviously the cyberbullying is ripe because unlike when I was, in high school or middle school, if I was having a hard time with some jerk, I would go home and I would have a reprieve. I'm stating the obvious here. I know you all know this. It's 24/7 now, unless the phone is put away or the computer or the whatever, because it's not just the phone often. You get into middle school, high school, the 99% of their homework, at least down by me, is on some type of screen. So they're doing their homework on the screen, which means they have all the social media also on that same computer or screen, so they're multitasking. They're shifting their attention back and forth with a cost. Moving on, speed round. Periscope, wow, very good. Periscope comes with Twitter. If you have a Twitter account, you have Periscope. These are live streaming video apps, and there's more that I could even name. Pretty much every social media app now has a live streaming component. And when I say live streaming, I mean live streaming. And I've done these talks around the